Hi, this is Alexandra Kitty. Welcome to season 2 of True Crime Wrong Story. Now, before I get into this preface, I'm going to talk a little bit about postmortem on season 1. So, season 1 was basically me uh, trying something different in the genre and seeing where I was going to go. So, there's things that I've done right that will carry over, and then there's stuff I needed to redo. So first, let's talk about the stuff that I liked. The angle of each case, I liked very much. Questioning things from official narrative because people tend to be very complacent. They're given a narrative and they don't question. So this going and asking basic questions, what you would expect a good journalist to do, not just run with whatever somebody's press release tells them to go. And we can find that there's a lot of stagnation in the true crime genre precisely because people are copying a script. They're copying a formula week in, week out. And then they complain about, AI copies stuff. Well, so do you. So we don't want to go there. And that's one of the pluses I really liked. One of the things I also liked, but I'm not sure where to go with it, was the back and forth with the AI. I found that sometimes it gave long-winded answers, a little longer than I would have wanted, but a lot of times there was a lot of insight. So I didn't want it to be just a rehash. So that's going to be shorter and different this season than next. I was getting used to trying different things with it. So I liked it, but it needs to be a little more finessed and shorter. Also, although on this one I'm doing without myself on the camera, and there is a reason for it, you will see me starting next week on the camera. I think talking like this is fine, but I do like to appear on camera. It's not vanity. It's just, looking at people directly, or they're looking at me and they can see the nonverbal communication, which is extremely. So for this is, I would call episode 0, season 2. And last season, there was a theme about camouflage, things that were hidden, things that were there all along. But because of the narrative hid the important questions. The narrative did not show things that were right there. From the Stainer brothers, why did the family, you know, uh, reject a therapist but invite journalists? There was a reason for it. Just as we can talk about race in the O.J. Simpson trial, but the fact is that this was not about race so much as it was about a jury consultant's quality of leadership between two attorneys. There was a lot more going on. So there was things that we do not pay attention to. And that was season 1's theme. Now, season 2 is sins of omission and what gets gutted in a case, in a story. So by the time most true crime stories reach you, they've already been gutted. And the best way to understand this is understanding the nature of journalism, something I know a lot about. Not that I worked as a journalist. I wanted to become one to conduct studies in the profession, and I wrote a myriad of well-researched books in the area. And one thing that most people do not understand, because they hear a story and they think it's the single flow, and it is not that at all. A journalist will ask different people what they saw. They will go get documents from different places, and then they harmonize. So when you're harmonizing a whole bunch of stuff, there's things you leave in, and there's things that you take out. And people go, the stories, you don't know. It's not a single chord. You're weaving different chords. It's a cacophony made to sound harmonic. And when you're doing a true crime episode or book or show, it's totally that, because you're interviewing police officers or district attorneys or defense attorneys or the accused or the victims' families or forensic scientists. You're going through a whole bunch of people to harmonize this narrative. And when you do that, you can omit things, but actual cases themselves can omit things. So yes, the headlines are intact. The killer's name is intact. The verdict is intact. But the guts of the case, who mattered, what was missed, what was quietly thrown away, are already gone. So this season of True Crime Wrong Story this anthology series is about those missing organs, those sins of omission. So what is a sin of omission? We talk about true crime like it's a complete record. The call comes in, the detectives arrive, the forensics click, justice happens, the end. But every story you hear about, is a version of what happened. And every version has cuts. Some cuts are obvious: time, word count, attention spans. And other cuts are strategic. A victim whose name never makes it into the headline. A detective whose work never makes it into the story. A piece of evidence that nearly went into a dumpster. A witness who's declared missing when they're in fact right there. Those aren't oversights. Those are sins of omission. So a sin of omission is the decision by police, prosecutors, courts, media, sometimes the families, to leave something out of the official story and then pretend the story is whole. If you've read my book, my first book, Don't Believe It, How Lies Become News, I go into discussions how often the piece, when a journalist is working on the story, the piece that's missing, they're kept from him, is actually the most important piece that puts the incident or an event in perspective. So this season isn't about what storytellers add. It's not about their gravy. It's about what gets taken out, which guts are removed, and what the surgery does to our idea of justice and our understanding of individual cases. Because people think they know. Okay, they've watched a ton of true crime shows and they think they know. Oh, I know. No, you have heard, you didn't pick up the individual evidence, you didn't process it, you didn't interview people, you didn't read the police files, the court files. You know a smidgen. You know the Reader's Digest of it. Now, when I worked on A Time to Kill, I was a television true crime researcher. I was given a case. This case ended up not getting on air because the problem was this case, it wasn't a whodunit, it was a chase, and this had to be a whodunit, and this was not I just inherited this file that was doomed, and it was really sad that it was. But the interesting thing is when you're reading these court files, and there's thousands of pages, a case can have 5,000-6,000 pages, and this is just the police files. Never mind the court files, never mind the media articles over. There's just a ton of information. And so you're reading these things that never end up in the official account. So you could be watching a true crime show. You could be reading a newspaper article about that case, and you have no idea. Police have to, for instance, follow every lead. So in this one case that did not end up going on air, there were people calling the police, from another state saying, well, I read the National Enquirer and I had a vision. What happened to your victim? And the police have to follow this lead. They have to spend resources following things. So this is not what about the storytellers add. It's about what's taken out, which guts are removed, and what that surgery does. And I want to say this again. This is about what storytellers add, what gets taken out, what guts are removed, and what the surgery does to our idea of justice. I say this 3 times. If there's anything you come away with, that's what I want you to come away with this season. What the removal does to alter our perceptions of reality. So in this season, we're going to show you 6 ways a story can be gutted. So this is season 2, 6 episodes, 6 different ways a case can be gutted. The case can be gutted. The police can be gutted. The record can be gutted. The witness, the evidence, and the victim themselves can be gutted. This is not minor. How many times have you formed an opinion about a case, and yet if you had gotten a critical piece of information, would you have thought the same way? So I'm going to introduce you to these cases. I'm not going to summarize anything. I'm going to talk about missing pieces. So the first case we're going to come across is a watchdog that no one remembers. So a citizen journalist is murdered. We don't actually almost have no surviving narrative of this case. So on paper, it's barely a case. So the sin we're going to talk about next week is the case itself. So what happens when something gets erased from the public record? And with homicides, this happens much more than the ones that get recounted. So interestingly enough, true crime shows and podcasts will tend to run after the same stories. And there's reasons for it. And usually it's how cooperative police departments are. And some police departments in some states and provinces are more giving than others. And then we're going to look at something from an unusual angle, a case without detectives. So this is a case, one of those cases that has been retold on true crime programs, and yet there's something very peculiar. And this is a personal observation that I'm going to go through in the next week, because this case has been told so many times, and yet there's something glaringly missing. And I noticed it, and other people who were in that same genre didn't. So we're going to talk about when you don't actually have a big piece of the puzzle. Then in episode 3, we're going to talk what happens when we think there's been justice and the killer's been, made to pay, and all of a sudden there's no record. So we're going to talk about what happens when things have been smoothed over and there is no, there might be a newspaper article or a magazine article there, but if you look or if you ask for certain files, all of a sudden they're gone. So we're going to talk about a clean record. And then in episode 4, we're going to talk what happens when things come down to a single witness that's no longer there and the witness is gone and the case hinges on this person that's now become a ghost. And then episode 5, we're going to talk about missing evidence. What happens when the evidence of a case just seems to vanish? What happens? And then finally, on episode 6, we're going to find out what happens with something that is very common. And you hear it a lot in true crime, but usually there's a complete mystery. Here's a partial mystery when a victim doesn't have a name. You have absolutely every other piece of the puzzle except one. And you can't, and none of the evidence you have helps you. So those are different kinds of omissions that make a huge difference. So 6 episodes, 6 different cuts, 6 different ways to gut a story and still call it justice. So how does this connect to season 1 in KlueIQ? If you listen to season 1 of True Crime Wrong Story, and I recommend that you do, you know the spine. We took famous cases you thought you knew, the Stainer brothers, Susan Lawrence, G.K. Owens, O.J. Simpson, Charlie Manson, NXIVM, and we turned the official story inside out. So that season moved from loud, myth-heavy cases towards quieter truths hidden underneath them until we went to cases that barely got a mention. So from cases that were oversaturated to ones that maybe one local publication, online publication mentioned it and it's not there. So season 2 is going to invert that. So we start in the quiet. So a watchdog whose case barely exists on paper. A victim whose killer has a name before she does. Then we work outward, showing how the omission isn't an accident at the margins. It's a system, it's an engine, it's a habit, it's a set of decisions. So this is a KlueIQ series, which means we're not here, for any sort of propaganda, dead girl fetish, or sensationalism. We're here to read case files differently, to notice what everyone else has learned to stop seeing. Now, after the 6th episode comes a 7th one, which will be an interactive experience. So it's not going to be on YouTube. It's going to be on itch.io. So you can interact with it. There's multiple endings. You can explore this concept of sins of omission. So as you watch season 2, I want you to do something with me. When you hear a case, don't just ask what happened. Ask who disappears between the first report and the last documentary. Whose work never gets mentioned? Which decisions get written off as routine instead of dangerous? Whose name is missing, even in a solved murder? Those are the sins of omission. That's where this season resides. I'm Alexandra Kitty. This is True Crime Wrong Story, Sins of Omission. Starting next week, we're going to open the files that were supposed to stay. Till then, ta-ta for now.